Welcome to Sleepy Expeditions. Someone is singing. Across the wire, a German voice. Tenor, clear and steady in the frozen night air. You know this melody. Your boots are wet. You are sitting in a trench in Belgium. December 24th, 1914, and the man who has been trying to kill you for 4 months is singing Silent Night. The guns have been quiet for 3 hours. Nobody ordered that. Nobody agreed to it. It just happened. 4 months ago you were a schoolteacher in Shropshire. You taught history to boys who found it difficult to sit still. Tonight you are here. Find a comfortable position. Let the imaginary cold settle around you. The specific, clean cold of a Belgian winter night, sharp enough to make your breath visible, still enough to carry a voice across 50 meters of frozen ground. Close your eyes. The singing is getting louder. The trench is a world, not a temporary place you pass through, a world you inhabit. 2 meters deep, wooden boards on the floor so you don't sink into the mud with every step. Sandbag walls that smell of wet earth and something older you cannot name. At intervals, small dugouts cut into the rear wall, barely large enough to lie down in, smelling of damp timber and the accumulated presence of many men over many months. You have lived here since October. The first week, everything was wrong. The smell, the cold, the rats, and there are always rats, large and bold and entirely indifferent to the humans sharing their environment. The particular acoustic quality of being underground, the way sound travels differently through earth and timber than through open air. By November, nothing felt wrong anymore. Not because things improved, because you adapted. The human nervous system adapts to almost anything given enough time and no alternative. This is useful. It is also, in its way, disturbing. The realization that the brain can reclassify the unbearable as normal. That the threshold of what constitutes ordinary experience is far more flexible than you knew. Your boots have been wet for 11 days. Not damp, wet. A condition. Something you stopped noticing the way you stopped noticing your own heartbeat. 3 weeks ago, duckboards arrived. Wooden slats on the mud floor so you don't sink with every step. The improvement was significant enough that men stood and looked at them for a moment before walking on them. Small ceremonies mark the arrival of small comforts here. The duckboards warranted one. Small things matter here, more than they ever did in England. A dry pair of socks, a letter from home, a cup of tea that is actually hot rather than merely warm. These things constitute a good day. Tonight the candle on the German parapet flickers in a light wind. A second voice has joined the first across the wire. You listen without moving. Everyone does. August 7th. A recruiting office in Shrewsbury. 3 days after Britain declared war, you walked through the door. Not swept up in something, not because the newspapers told you to. You thought about it for 3 days, genuinely thought about it, sitting in your kitchen reading reports from Belgium, walking through familiar streets, watching men you knew make decisions, and concluded that this was not something you could stand aside from. The recruiting sergeant shook your hand. He said it would be over by Christmas. You believed him. Not naively, everyone believed him. The military planners on every side had designed their strategies around rapid, decisive movement. The last major European war ended quickly. The idea of a conflict lasting years belonged to history books, not to 1914. The certainty was universal, and universally wrong. The train to the coast, the crossing to France, the march toward Belgium, and then the mathematics arrived. Defenders in covered positions shooting at attackers crossing open ground. The defenders win every time. No amount of courage or training or planning changes this equation. The equation is the equation. By October, both sides had dug. By November, 470 miles of trenches ran from the English Channel to the Swiss border. By December, the Christmas prediction was not merely optimistic, it was structurally impossible, and everyone in the trenches knew it, and almost no one said it directly because saying it directly would require confronting what kind of war this actually was. So instead you wrote letters home. You chose your words carefully in those letters. You described the trench without describing it as it actually was. You asked about ordinary things, the garden, the neighbours, whether the school had found someone for your classes. You did not describe the rats. You did not describe lying awake counting the intervals between shells, trying to calculate from the sound whether the next one would be closer. Some things cannot be explained to people who are not here. This is the loneliness inside the loneliness. October. Your first time under serious fire. Not the distant artillery that had been background noise since you arrived. This was close, the kind of close that removes the possibility of thinking about anything except what is happening right now. The shells landed in sequence, each one closer than the last. You pressed yourself against the wall of the trench. The man to your left did the same. Nobody spoke. There was nothing useful to say, and the noise made speech impossible anyway. The sound was not what you expected. Not the clean bang of a gun, but something more physical, more total. A pressure that you felt in your chest and your teeth and the back of your skull simultaneously. Then silence. Then Williams checking if everyone was intact. They were. Then the work continued. This is the thing nobody tells you about being under fire. Afterward, the work continues. There is no pause to process what just happened. The trench requires maintenance regardless of what the artillery has been doing. The maintenance continues. You continue with it, and somewhere in the continuation your body makes its accommodation with what just occurred. Not by resolving it, by moving on from it. By the third time it was different, not comfortable, not normal, but familiar in the way that repeated experience creates familiarity even with things that should never become familiar. The fear arrived and was noted and was set aside because the situation required it, and you had learned by the third time that you were capable of doing this. The fourth time you barely noticed until it was over. This is what sustained exposure does. It doesn't make you braver, it makes the extraordinary ordinary by forcing the nervous system to reclassify it. The threshold shift. What registered as extreme on day 1 registers as manageable by week 4. This is useful. It is also a kind of loss. The gradual erosion of the appropriate response to things that should remain extraordinary. But tonight the extraordinary is happening in the opposite direction. Silence where there should be guns. Singing where there should be nothing. The threshold is shifting again, but this time towards something the war has been trying to prevent. The war is not standing still. Even in the trenches, where the lines have not moved significantly since October, the war is developing, learning, finding new ways to do what wars do. The machine gun changed everything first. A single machine gun, properly positioned, can cover a front of several hundred meters. A team of 2 men can produce a rate of fire that would have required hundreds of riflemen a generation ago. The mathematics of attack and defense were already unfavorable to the attacker before the machine gun. The machine gun made them decisive. Then came the artillery developments, heavier shells, more accurate targeting, the systematic destruction of trench systems before infantry attacks. In theory, in practice the artillery rarely destroys enough to make the infantry assault survivable, but the attempt is made, and the shells fall, and the landscape around both sets of trenches has been transformed into something that looks, from the air, like the surface of the moon. You have heard that there are engineers on both sides working on other things. Gas, some of the men say. You dismiss this at first as rumour, then you hear it from a source you trust. Then you hear about experiments in laboratories, about cylinders being moved up to the front, about chemicals that can be released in clouds and carried by the wind toward enemy trenches. You don't know if it is true. By April 1915, you will know it is true. Second Ypres, chlorine gas released from 4,000 cylinders along a 4-mile front. A yellow-green cloud drifting toward the Allied trenches in the late afternoon. Men who did not understand what they were seeing until it was too late. The specific horror of a weapon that fills the lungs and drowns a man in his own body's response to it. But that is April. That is next year. Tonight is December. Tonight the war has paused. Tonight something is happening in the space between the trenches that the war's developers, the engineers and chemists and strategists working on new ways to kill, did not plan for and cannot account for. Something that requires no development, no engineering, no chemistry, just a candle and a song and the particular human instinct that persists even here. The plan was called the Schlieffen Plan, Germany's strategy for fighting a two-front war against France in the west and Russia in the east simultaneously. The solution was speed. Defeat France quickly through Belgium before Russia could fully mobilize. Then turn east. It required Belgium. Britain had guaranteed Belgian neutrality in 1839, when Germany crossed the Belgian border on August 4, 1914. Britain declared war. The plan failed at the Marne in September. The French and British lines held. The German advance reversed, and then both sides faced the same problem simultaneously: how to hold the ground they had without the losses that open field defense produces. The answer was the same for both: dig, and so they dug, and the lines solidified, and the war that was supposed to be over in weeks became the war that would last 4 years and kill 17 million people and reshape the political map of the world. You understand the broad outline of this. You are a history teacher. You have read enough to understand how wars begin and how they tend to develop. What you did not understand until you were inside it was what it feels like from the ground level. Not the strategic picture, but the daily reality of living inside a strategic situation that neither side has a good way to resolve. Both sides have the same problem. The defense is too strong for the offense. The machine gun and the barbed wire and the prepared position have given the defender an advantage that the current weapons and tactics of the attacker cannot overcome. Everyone knows this. No one has solved it, so the lines hold. And the men in the trenches go about the daily business of living in the space between two unresolvable positions. And tonight, on Christmas Eve, something happens that the strategists did not plan for and cannot account for. Something human. Your feet are a problem. Not tonight specifically, but feet in wet boots in a wet trench for weeks at a time become a problem. Trench foot, the tissue breaks down when it is wet and cold for long enough. The foot swells, the skin changes colour. In serious cases, the damage is permanent. You check your feet every day. You change your socks when you have dry ones, which is not always. You do what can be done with what is available. The cold brings other things too. Chilblains on your hands, the itching inflammation of skin exposed repeatedly to cold. Not frostbite, but damage. A persistent low-level misery that accumulates alongside everything else. The cough. Almost everyone has some version of the cough by November. The damp air, the smoke from the small stoves in the dugouts, the general reduction in the body's defences that comes from months of inadequate sleep and inadequate food and sustained strain. You cough and manage it and continue. This is the body's remarkable quality, its capacity to keep functioning under conditions it was not designed for. Not without cost. The cost accumulates. The body notes everything even when the mind is occupied elsewhere. But the functioning continues because the alternative is not available. And then there is the other cost. The one that is harder to describe and harder to measure. What sustained fear does to a person over time. Not the acute fear of a specific moment, shells landing close, a gas alarm, the specific instant of danger. That fear is manageable because it has a beginning and an end. What the trench produces is something different. A permanent low-level alertness that never fully switches off. The nervous system recalibrated for an environment where the threat is always present and never fully resolved. You feel this in small ways. The way you wake at sounds that would not have woken you in August. The way your body reacts to sudden noises that it would have ignored before. The particular quality of tiredness that comes not from physical exertion, but from the sustained vigilance of months. You are 28 years old. Some mornings you feel considerably older. Tonight the guns are silent, and for the first time in weeks, the vigilance has eased slightly, and something in your body is taking advantage of the quiet to rest in a way it has not been resting. 23 men in your section. You know all of them. Not the way you knew people in Shropshire. Not the accumulated knowledge of shared history and family and years of ordinary life intersecting. The faster kind, the essential kind. The knowledge that forms when people share a small space under significant pressure for a long time with no alternative. Arthur is to your left, 22 years old, from Liverpool, a docker's son who enlisted 3 days after you by an entirely different route. He has a photograph of his mother in his breast pocket, kind eyes, standing in a garden that looks like it gets a lot of rain. He showed it to you in October, on a night when the shelling was particularly heavy and conversation was the only available comfort. You have thought about that photograph many times since, not because of anything particular about it, because he showed it to you, and the showing was a kind of trust, and the trust was worth receiving carefully. He does not complain. This is not stoicism, it is something more practical. Complaining requires energy and produces nothing. He has made this calculation and acts on it consistently. Henderson is to your right, older, Edinburgh, 35 perhaps. He has the particular stillness of a man who has accepted something the younger men are still fighting. You are not sure exactly what he has accepted, but the acceptance is visible in how he moves through the trench, without urgency, without the nervous energy that the younger men carry, as if he has already made his peace with the range of possible outcomes, and is now simply waiting to see which one arrives. Private Thomas is 20, Welsh. He has never mentioned any musical ability. He is about to start singing. Sergeant Williams runs the section. Regular army, in it since before you were teaching. He has been in South Africa and India, and places you have only read about in geography books. He does not talk about these places. He manages the section with a competence so quiet it is almost invisible. He is standing at the parapet now, looking across the wire. His expression is not the wariness that a sound from the enemy's direction would normally produce. Something more complex. Something that might be, if you had to name it, recognition. You have written 14 letters since October. Your sister writes back every week without fail. The letters take between 4 and 8 days depending on the mail situation. When they arrive, they are read immediately and then read again later, and sometimes a third time on nights when the trench is particularly quiet. She writes about ordinary things. The garden is doing well despite the weather. The neighbour's son has enlisted. The school found someone to cover your classes, a retired teacher, apparently adequate. The cat has taken to sleeping on the kitchen table, which she has decided not to discourage. You read these letters and feel two things simultaneously: the relief of contact, proof that the world you came from still exists, that ordinary life is continuing somewhere, that the cat is on the table and the garden is surviving, and the strangeness of the distance between that world and this one. The gap between a kitchen table with a cat on it and a trench in Belgium is not measured in miles. It is measured in everything that has happened since August. Arthur received a letter yesterday. He read it twice, folded it carefully, put it back in his breast pocket next to the photograph. Henderson has not received a letter in 3 weeks. You have noticed this. You have not said anything. There is nothing to say that would help, and several things that might make it worse. So you say nothing, and when the tea is distributed, you make sure Henderson gets a full cup, and this is the available language, and you use it. Tonight, in the candlelight from across the wire, the distance from home feels different. Not smaller, but less absolute. As if the fact that someone 50 meters away is also far from home, also missing the ordinary world, also singing songs that belong to a life that existed before August, creates a kind of company in the distance that was not there before. You have thought about the men in the German trenches more than anything else in 4 months. Not with hatred. This surprises you about yourself. You are a history teacher. You have read enough history to understand that the men on the other side of any conflict are men, with the same fears, the same distance from home, the same letters from people who are waiting. Knowing this intellectually is different from feeling it. You feel it here. The sounds carry on still nights, voices in German you cannot understand, laughter occasionally. The laughter sounds exactly the same in German as it does in English. You noticed this in October, and it stayed with you because it seemed at the time like important information. You were not sure what to do with it. The intelligence reports say the regiment opposite is Bavarian. Conscripts mostly. Farmers and tradesmen and craftsmen. Men who were doing ordinary things in August and are now doing this. Their rations are worse than yours. The naval blockade is beginning to show in German supply lines. You know this from the reports and from what you have observed. The quality of equipment recovered from German positions after engagements. The boots in particular. The German boots you have seen are not good boots. 50 meters away, the same cold, the same mud, the same rats, the same distance from everything that matters, the same awareness that Christmas was supposed to end this and did not. The same letters home that choose words carefully. Tonight one of them started singing, then 2, then a choir. Men who have been living in mud for 4 months finding their voices on Christmas Eve because it is Christmas Eve and the silence was too complete and too wrong to accept. You understand this completely. You would have done the same. The war requires a specific kind of forgetting. Not forgetting that the men across the wire are men. You never completely forget this. The sounds carry too clearly on still nights. The laughter, the coughing, the occasional shout in German that has the unmistakable rhythm of frustration or humour regardless of language. You never completely forget, but you learn to set it aside. This is what the trench teaches alongside everything else. How to function in close proximity to people you are required to treat as targets. How to maintain the necessary distance between the act of shooting and the full human weight of what you are shooting at. How to do your job, which includes, when ordered, adding to the arithmetic of casualties on the other side, without being paralyzed by it. This is not cruelty, it is a mechanism, the same mechanism that allows surgeons to cut into people without flinching and allows anyone who does difficult work to do it without being stopped by its full implications. The mechanism is not moral, it is functional. It exists because without it the work cannot be done, and in war the work must be done. But mechanisms have limits. They require specific conditions to function. They require the other side to remain abstract. The wire helps, the distance helps, the darkness helps. The fact that you have never clearly seen their faces helps enormously. Remove these conditions and the mechanism begins to fail. Tonight someone removed the conditions, a candle on the parapet. Faces visible in the light, a melody that belongs equally to both sides of the wire, the specific human act of singing, which cannot be done by a category, only by a person. Carrying across no man's land and landing in your chest as something that the mechanism has no response to. Recognition. Not chosen, not decided. Simply arriving. The way a familiar face arrives in a crowd. Not because you were looking for it, but because the brain, which has been cataloguing and comparing faces since before you could walk, recognizes something, and the recognition is complete before the conscious mind has time to decide whether recognition is appropriate. Your brain recognizes the men across the wire as men. It has always known this. Tonight the conditions finally allow the knowing to be felt. Christmas in the trenches has been attempted. The army has made efforts. Extra rations were promised, and arrived mostly a day or two before Christmas. Parcels from home have been accumulating in the mail system for weeks, the army having made specific arrangements for the volume of Christmas post that families have been sending since October. Cigarettes, chocolate, tins of things, socks. You received a parcel from your sister last week. A fruitcake in a tin, somewhat compressed from its journey but intact. A pair of socks, dry, thick, the best thing she could have sent. A small photograph of the house in Shropshire with a note on the back saying the garden looks better than it did in summer. You ate the fruitcake over 3 days, one careful slice per day, making it last. The socks you are saving, not for tonight. Tonight you are wearing what you are wearing, and changing now would require taking your boots off in the cold, and the calculation does not favour it, but they are there in your pack, and the knowledge of them is its own small comfort. The army also arranged for there to be carol sheets, printed on thin paper, distributed through the supply chain, arriving somewhat crumpled but legible. The words to 12 carols, chosen presumably by someone in an office somewhere who thought this was what soldiers in Belgium would want on Christmas Eve. Thomas has been looking at his. This is perhaps why when the German choir started, he knew the words. Or perhaps it is simpler than that. Perhaps the words to Silent Night are the kind of thing that a boy who grew up going to church in Wales carries without knowing he carries them. Part of the furniture of a life, available when needed, available tonight. The routine is the strangest part. Not the danger, not the cold, the routine. Stand to at dawn, every man on the fire step, watching the grey light come up over no man's land. Rifles ready, because dawn is when attacks traditionally happen, and enough examples have accumulated to make the precaution rational. Stand to at dusk. Between these, the day fills with the work the trench requires. Sandbags rot and must be replaced. The walls slump in wet weather and must be rebuilt. The duckboards shift and must be repositioned. The drainage channels, cut along the bottom of the trench to carry water away, become blocked and must be cleared. Someone is always fixing something. The trench is a living system, and it demands constant attention or it begins to return to what it was: mud. Breakfast, maintenance, letter writing, sleeping when sleeping is possible. The lice are constant. You made your peace with them by November. You manage them the way you manage everything here, as a condition requiring maintenance rather than a problem awaiting solution. The distinction matters psychologically. A problem implies a resolution. A condition implies ongoing management. The trench teaches you the difference. The rats are bold. They have adapted to this environment more completely than any soldier has. They move along the duckboards at night with the confidence of something that belongs here. They have learnt that humans are not a threat. They are correct. You are not a threat to the rats. The rats have thrived. You are managing. You have adapted too. Not as completely, but enough. Enough to function. Enough to eat without thinking too carefully about what food was before it became rations. Enough to sleep. Not always, not well, but enough, when the shells permit it. Enough to be here tonight, listening to a German choir sing Silent Night across no man's land, and feel something that you will spend years afterward trying to describe accurately to people who were not here. It begins with a single candle. On the German parapet, 50 meters away, a small flame appearing above the sandbags in the darkness. Williams sees it first. You hear him make a sound, not quite a word, an intake of breath that communicates something without forming itself into language, and then the men who are awake are looking over the parapet at the small point of light across no man's land. Then another candle, then another. The Germans are placing candles along their parapet, one after another, moving down the line, the lights appearing in sequence, small and steady in the still air. The effect is impossible to reduce to simple description. A line of candlelight, in a trench, in a war, on Christmas Eve. Each flame placed deliberately by a person who made a decision to place it, knowing it would be seen, knowing it communicated something, trusting that what it communicated would be received the way it was intended. Trust, across no man's land. The singing fills out as the lights appear, more voices joining. What started as one man has become something that sounds from your trench like a choir rehearsing in the cold, disciplined, layered, the voices finding each other across the distance. Private Thomas opens his mouth. He sings back, in English, Silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright. His voice carries. The German choir pauses. A moment of complete silence, both sides listening to each other listen. Perhaps 3 seconds. Then the German voices resume, fuller and louder, and Thomas sings with them, two languages layered over the same melody, the music holding them together across everything that has been trying to keep them apart for 4 months. Williams is not stopping this. You look at him, he looks at you, no words. He turns back to the parapet and watches. Williams goes first. He stands at the parapet for several minutes. You can see him working through something, the calculation that a man in his position has to make, weighing what is happening against what he is supposed to do about it. The regulations do not have a page for this. The training does not have a protocol for this. Whatever decision he makes, he is making it without institutional support. He climbs over the top. No rifle, into no man's land. Upright, walking slowly toward the middle, the moonlight clear enough that he is visible against the pale, frozen ground, a single figure moving into the space between the lines that has, for 4 months, existed for the sole purpose of killing people. From the German trench, a figure appears, also without a weapon, also upright, also walking. They meet in the center. You cannot hear what they say, too far, too quiet, but you can see them standing together in the moonlight, two men between two armies, and the image has a quality that is almost too strange to look at directly, too far outside the established parameters of what this place is and what happens here. Then more figures from both sides, men climbing over parapets, walking out, moving toward each other without orders, without permission, without any framework for what they are doing except the framework of it being Christmas Eve and someone having lit a candle. You climb over the parapet. The ground of no man's land is different from the trench ground. No walls, no cover, no duckboards, just open earth under an open sky, the stars very clear, frost crystals catching the moonlight. You walk toward the figures in the middle. The German soldiers are close now. Real, specific, individual, not silhouettes, not the source of the shells and the machine gun fire. People, standing in the moonlight on Christmas Eve. Breath visible in the cold air. Faces readable. Tired, cold, far from home, like you. No man's land in daylight is one thing. You have seen it through the periscope, the carefully managed view over the parapet that allows observation without exposure. The ground between the lines looks, in daylight, like something that has been through a sustained argument with itself. Churned, pockmarked by shell craters that fill with water when it rains, and freeze in weather like this, crossed and recrossed by barbed wire in patterns that reflect months of incremental addition, each side adding wire when they can, creating a tangle that serves no aesthetic purpose and every defensive one. There are things in no man's land that are not craters and wire. You do not look at these through the periscope. At night, no man's land is different. The darkness removes the specific details and leaves only the quality of the space, the openness of it, the particular exposure of a place with no cover, the feeling of being in a location that belongs to neither side and therefore to both sides equally, which is to say it belongs to no one. Walking into it tonight, upright, without a rifle, is the strangest physical experience of your time here. Stranger than the first time under fire, stranger than the first night in the trench, because you chose this. Nobody ordered you over the parapet. Nobody would have stopped you if you had stayed in the trench. The choice was entirely yours, made in a second following Williams without quite deciding to follow him. your legs carrying you forward before the question of whether to go forward was fully formed. The ground under your boots is hard with frost. Each step produces a faint crunch. You are aware that the sound is audible, that across the wire in the German trench, someone could be listening to your footsteps approaching, that the situation you are walking into is one with no established protocol, no precedent you have been trained for, no certain outcome. And yet you keep walking, because Williams is ahead of you, because Thomas was singing, because 50 meters away a man who saved a good cigar for Christmas Eve is walking toward you across the same frozen ground. Because the alternative, staying in the trench while this happens without you, seems in this specific moment impossible to accept. His name is Hans. He is from Munich. Before August he was a baker. He extends his hand and you shake it. The handshake is completely ordinary. Same pressure, same brief firmness, same release that any handshake has. And it is the most extraordinary thing that has happened to you since you arrived in Belgium. Why does it feel that way? Because for 4 months the men across the wire have existed as a category, the enemy, a source of danger, something to be managed and defended against and, when ordered, shot at. And a handshake collapses a category into a person. You cannot shake hands with a category. You shake hands with Hans, with a specific man who has a name and a city and a profession and cold hands in December. He produces a photograph from his coat pocket. A woman and 2 children, studio portrait, the formal pose of an important occasion, Sunday clothes, careful posture, the slightly strained expression of people trying to look natural for a camera, his wife and daughters. He says their names. The names are ordinary German names that you will remember for the rest of your life without quite knowing why. You say they are beautiful because they are, and because it is the only possible response. You show him the letter from your sister. He holds it carefully, does not read it, cannot read it, but holds it with the attention of a man thinking about the person who wrote it, the house it came from, the ordinary life that produced it. Then he hands it back. He reaches into his coat, a cigar, a good one, produced with a slight flourish, the gesture of a man who has been saving something for exactly the right occasion and has decided, after 4 months in a trench, that this is it. You both laugh. The laughter is exactly the same in both languages. This is what you will remember longest. Not the handshake, not the photograph. The laughter. The identical sound of 2 men finding the same thing funny at the same moment in the same cold field. The war requires you to believe that what separates you is larger than what connects you. The laughter disagrees. Along the Western Front, it is happening in hundreds of places. Not everywhere. Some commanders enforce the orders against fraternization. Some sections have seen too much too recently for this to be possible. The losses too fresh, the bitterness too immediate. Some stretches of front carry a weight that Christmas cannot lift. But in hundreds of places, men are doing what you are doing, meeting in the middle, exchanging cigarettes and chocolate and the photographs of people who are waiting, helping each other bury the dead who have been lying in no man's land since October, whose presence has been a source of distress to both sides, and whose burial has been impossible while the shooting continued, and carrying them back in silence. The silence is the ceremony. Nothing more is needed. In some sections they play football. This detail will be remembered for 100 years. 2 armies, no man's land, a ball. The rules of a game holding for an hour what the laws of war could not. You don't play football tonight. You stand in the frost with hands, and talk in fragments about the things that need the fewest words. The cold, the mud, the food. He grimaces at this, confirming what the intelligence reports have said about German rations. You give him half your chocolate without deliberating. He gives you the cigar. Small exchanges, no ceremony, just two men finding, in the frost and the moonlight, that what they have in common is larger than what 4 months of war has been insisting separates them. The enmity that has been sustaining this war is conditional. It requires specific conditions to function. It requires the wire and the distance and the darkness. It requires the men on the other side to remain abstract, to remain a category rather than a collection of individuals. The trench enables this. The distance enables this. 4 months of being shot at by people you cannot see enables this. Face to face, in moonlight, with a shared melody still in the air, the abstraction fails. Hans is not the enemy. Hans is a baker from Munich who misses his daughters and saves good cigars for occasions that deserve them, and laughs the same way you laugh. The enemy was a construction, necessary for the war to function. But here, in no man's land on Christmas Eve, the construction has temporarily collapsed. What remains underneath it is simpler and more durable. Two people, cold hands, a shared joke about a cigar. You will survive this war. This is not something you know tonight, but you will. You will return to Shropshire in 1919 and stand in your own kitchen for a long time before you are able to do something as ordinary as make tea. The familiar things will feel slightly wrong for a while, too clean, too quiet, too far from the specific texture of 4 years that you will carry without being able to fully set down. You will return to teaching eventually, boys who are too young to have been in it, who will look at you with the particular curiosity that the young reserve for people who have been somewhere they cannot imagine. Some of them will ask you about the war. You will answer carefully. Some things you will describe, others you will not. You will think about Hans. Not every day, but regularly in the way you think about things that changed something in you. Quietly, permanently, without drama. You will wonder what happened to him, whether he survived, whether he went back to Munich and back to his bakery, and whether his daughters, whose names you will always remember, grew up in a world that was better than the one their father spent Christmas Eve 1914 in. You will never know. This is the hardest part. The handshake in no man's land created a connection, a real one, between specific people, made of shared cold and shared laughter and a cigar produced with a flourish. And then the war resumed, and the connection had no way to follow through. Hans went back to his trench, you went back to yours, and the specific man from Munich became someone you carry without knowing his ending. Wars do this. They put people in proximity and create connections, and then prevent those connections from becoming anything. They introduce you to the full humanity of the person across the wire, and then require you to continue the war anyway. The introduction and the continuation exist simultaneously, and the contradiction between them is one of the things about this war that you will spend years afterward not quite being able to resolve. But tonight you do not think about any of this. Tonight is the frost and the moonlight and the singing and the handshake and the identical sound of laughter in 2 languages. Tonight that is enough. Christmas morning, cold and clear. The exchanges continue through the morning. More photographs, more small gifts, the burial parties working through the frozen ground on both sides, recovering the dead in silence. The silence is the ceremony. By afternoon, something shifts. The truce withdraws the way a tide withdraws. Gradually, without announcement, the covered ground becoming visible again. Distant guns, the familiar sound returning to the acoustic background of the world, and with it the returning awareness of what this is, what follows. Williams tells his men to return to their positions. The German sergeant does the same. The figures in no man's land reduce to ones and twos, then to none. The footprints in the frost are the only evidence. Two sets walking toward the middle from either side, meeting, standing a while, then walking back. Before you go back over the parapet, Hans appears at the edge of his trench. He calls your name. You told it to him last night. He remembered. He raises his hand. You raise yours. You go back into the trench. The Christmas truce will not be repeated at this scale. By December 1915, the war has become something different. The battles of the intervening year, Neuve-Chapelle, Second Ypres with its poison gas, Loos, have produced casualties that 1914 had not yet accumulated, and a bitterness that the first Christmas, somehow, had not yet generated. The high commands on both sides issue firm orders. Local truces occur, but nothing like this. The war continues for 4 more years, 17 million dead. You don't know any of this tonight. You only know what happened. That for a few hours on Christmas Eve 1914, in hundreds of places along the Western Front, the war stopped. Not because anyone with authority decided it should. Because a man in a trench lit a candle. Because another man sang. Because the men on both sides discovered in person the thing the war had been working hard to make them forget. That the man across no man's land has daughters whose names he says with a particular tenderness. That he laughs the same way. That he saves good cigars for occasions that deserve them. This did not end the war. It did not prevent the 4 years that followed. It did not save the 17 million, but it is there, in the record of what human beings have done to each other and for each other across history. One entry among millions, unremarkable in scale, impossible to dismiss. 2 sets of footprints meeting in the middle. A handshake. Laughter that sounds the same in 2 languages. You are back in the trench. Your boots are still wet. The frost is harder now. The temperature dropping in the hours after midnight. Your breath comes in small clouds that disperse quickly in the still air. The blanket around your shoulders is not quite adequate. It never is. The guns are quiet still. You sit against the rear wall. Somewhere in the German trench, 50 meters away, Hans the baker is also sitting, also cold, also quiet, thinking about things the morning will not change. You don't know what happens to him. You don't know what happens to you. You only know tonight. The silence where the guns were, the frost on the ground, the memory of a handshake in no man's land and laughter that sounded exactly the same in 2 languages, and a cigar produced from a coat pocket with the flourish of a man who had been saving it for exactly this. Let that be enough. Close your eyes. The trench is very still. Sleep now. The morning will come when it comes.